Hello and welcome. Thank you for surviving the long day and still finding a hope and enthusiasm to listen about the coup season. And it kind of coincides with the rainy season here. And this is going to be a little session where we are going to try to figure out what the heck with all of these coups. So what's happening? It's like, why? What's wrong? First of all, let me say, proud to be here, proud to be on Oslo Freedom Forum. For those of you who have been here, you know it's more of a family and less of a conference. For those of you who are here first time, I can promise you this is not going to be your last time. My name is Srdja Popović. I'm Executive Director of Canvas. People often introduce me here as a Oslo Freedom Forum resident DJ. So whenever there is an event, they don't have anybody to lead, they kind of recruit me. So I sound always the same, where I'm talking about the coups, transitions, delivering medals, things of that kind, so sorry for that. That's just the autopilot. Today I'm going to have extraordinary pleasure to chat with you, and I hope it will be with you. So we'll be like 20 minutes talking, and then you take the lead. And we are going to have Wai Hnin Pwint Thon. Did I make the mistake? How many?
Oh, that's great.
How many mispronunciations? Okay, why? This is easy. And democratic activist from Burma, country which recently experienced coup. Rania Abdulaziz, or Ronnie for friends. Female rights, human rights activist leader from Sudan. Country which experienced coup, defeated coup, and now has coup again. And Jamila Raqib, a long-time friend of mine, though she's much younger than me, as you can see, who worked for years with Gene Sharp in Albert Einstein Institution, the institution that was really digging into the coup and probably made the best book called Anti-Coup about the coups and how to deal with coups ever. And if you are into coups or into countering coups, I highly recommend the free PDF on it. So I'll start with a long and impressive list. Zimbabwe, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Gabon, Sudan, Mali, Myanmar, Guinea, Sudan too, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso. These are the countries that experienced coups in the last 5 years. So it seems that we are very well into the coup season. Just to explain what the coup is, there is a group of enthusiastic generals which are unhappy with government. It helps if the government is less democratic, so there is no public support for the government. So once they grab the power, people like in Guinea will go to the streets and cheer up for the coup. Sometimes come after the long conflict between divided political parties, so the military is there to save Thailand from red shirts and yellow shirts or whatever. There is always a lovely excuse which comes with we mean stability. And this is the main selling point of this situation. And then they need time to consolidate this power. Well, guess what? They're illegitimate. Nobody ever elected military to really take off the job. So they need a legitimacy, they need obedience, and today's session would be about these two things. What is the magic formula for countering the coups, how the movements are doing it across the world, what the history teaches us about this, and I'll try to make it more like a TV show and less as a panel. So there is a camera, so this is actually looks like a TV show, and we have these fancy things coming from our ears. So without further ado, I will do the first round of very quick questions. And of course, I'll start with Jamila, who studied coups and spoke with people coming from the coup countries and read the books and write the books and even read the footnotes, something that I'm not capable of, about this kind of stuff. So Jamila, we know what the coup is, we know how it starts, we know what the explanation is, we know that the population is in the state of shock when this happens, and normally it's not something you would expect. Is there a magic formula to deal with it? Like once you're in this situation, what the groups have been done?
Well, unfortunately, there's no magic formula, right, to so many things in life. But I am glad we're talking about this because, especially in this forum, I don't think we can talk about human rights and democracy without recognizing the role that coups have played and that they're playing in the world today in establishing dictatorships. But I think in thinking about coups, we also have to, recognize that there's a sort of classical model of a military kind of seizing power of the state, but there's also incremental coups, there's also electoral coups, there's the so-called autogolpe, or a self-coup, in which an elected leader kind of uses the institutions of the state, whether the military or,
which is happening in Tunisia as we speak.
Yeah, that's right. And in so many different cases, to kind of expand their own powers in order to stay in power illegally, against the Constitution. But I think in thinking about coups and what's the sort of relevant point, I think you pointed it out, and it's something we really should emphasize, and that is that coups are not single events, right? They're a series of events, they're a process, and from the time that a coup group tries to seize power to when it consolidates power and establishes a government is a very important period of time. And this is really, an opportunity because that establishment of power and that consolidation of power is not a given, right? It depends on so many different factors, and it's really what gives civil society, outside governments, regular citizens, legislative bodies, really an opportunity to launch an effective defense. And that's what we've, sort of studied as you pointed out. And I think at the root of it is this, these three things, two of which you mentioned. Deny the coup legitimacy, that means seizing the narrative, and denying it the cooperation and obedience and submission that it needs. And the third is to protect independent institutions. And there's obviously a whole kind of historical repertoire of what people have done to do that.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like we are looking into formula. And of course, we're going to go back to the legitimacy, which Pučists, of course, desperately need. They didn't draw it from the elections, so they don't have it. International legitimacy, ungovernability, but it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of strategy. But I'll start with emotions. February the 1st, it was my birthday, by the way. Yeah. You woke up February the 1st 2 years ago, and after successful elections and several years of semi-democracy in Burma, the tanks were again on the street. So how do you feel in this situation? And how you turn what I assume is a bulk of shock and anger into action?
Yes. Happy belated birthday, by the way. Very unfortunate.
They screw it. Gave me one more reason to hate them.
Yes. So, I mean, like you said, a year ago, the military decided to stage a coup. And so now when I meet people, a lot of people ask me, what is the situation in Burma? And what kind of human rights violations are happening under the military dictatorship? So my answer is that, human rights violations are happening every day. Even as we are sitting here, human rights violations are happening. But I correct them. We are not living under a military dictatorship. The military attempted to stage a coup last year, and it's an attempted coup, because even today people are still protesting, and the military hasn't been able to consolidate power. And that's an achievement for the people. Of course, in the beginning, we saw thousands of peaceful protesters on the street, and we saw that on the news. And the military dealt with it with the only language they know, which is violence. And we saw many peaceful protesters being shot in the head on the street, and more than thousands of people have been killed. And this is just the number that we know of. And over 13,000 political prisoners in Burma, because the military continue arresting anyone who stand up or speak up against the coup. And my father is one of the political prisoners, and I don't know when I will see him again, but we are one of many, many thousands. But all these activists on the ground, they know they will be arrested, there will be torture, they will be sexually abused, raped, and was killed. But knowing all of these risks, they still go out on the street and protest. And these protests are still happening today. It might not be thousands of people, but in a more creative way. We are seeing a silent strike, and the whole country are taking part by not going to market. And for the anniversary of the coup on 1st of February, the military really pressured people to open shops and supermarkets. But the creative way was a lot of shopkeepers come out to the market and just say, we're sold out. You know, we're not going to sell anything. So these are the acts of defiance we have been seeing. And of course, there are many young people who have faced violence, felt they have no choice but to take arms and fight against the military who have been killing, you know, unlawfully across the country. So, you know, all these protests and these acts of defiance, I feel because there is a determination. Because our determination, you know, gets stronger every day, and that determination is that we don't want to live under another military dictatorship, and we don't want to have our children grow up not knowing what freedom is, or not knowing what human rights is. We can't go back to the dark age again. So that determination is still there, and the hope is that the society in Burma is more united now. We are seeing a sense of solidarity and unity among ethnic nationalities across the country. And it's a really encouraging thing to see. And people are not calling for simple democracy anymore. They want inclusive model of federal democracy for the country. It's really encouraging. And of course, all these brave people who are risking their lives need international support to continue what they're doing and to keep up with hope. So, you know, coming here is great. I feel there is a sense of solidarity and is a great unit, you know, support. I want this unity, solidarity, and support to, you know, my people in Burma, and they really need that, and they're really desperate for support and help internationally.
Yeah, amazing points. I would just outline something that Jamila mentioned and that you just mentioned. There are at least 3 interesting things, and we can touch them in a second round. One way is creativity and what Jamila and myself in our boring language call the low-risk tactics. So as the oppression increases, you need to figure out how to give people something to do but still get away with it. So if people constantly get killed, they will be deterred from action. And we've seen many of these in Burma. We've seen Disney princesses march, and you know, it's like amazing cases of creativity, very difficult to suppress. Also, on more strategic level, what you mentioned is this something, once again, that Jamila and myself in our boring language will call parallel institutions. Like people not going to the schools, but instead going to the private schools and boycotting the schools run by the military. All of this is a part of package that you mentioned as ungovernability. So it's like, it's not only we deny you the legitimacy by calling you the putschists, but it's also we are not giving into your institutions. We build our own. So one of the interesting cases, of course, was Sudan. We had this lovely guy named Bashir, who was also a war criminal, and that guy was ousted from power by a popular action. And then, of course, the military seized the opportunity and stepped in. And then it appeared at first that they can be even more brutal than the guy who was in power there. And they want to be champions of killing and raping and putting bricks around people's legs and throwing them into the Nile. And still, in the country where you wouldn't expect it, I didn't expect it, because I haven't seen the level of organization, political parties, like usual troublemaking players. Still, Sudanese were capable to organize, mobilize, and force military to negotiation. So, how come?
How come?
Rania.
I think that came from the way we organized ourselves in the first revolution. This is revolution part 2, what we're going through now. But revolution part 1 was very organized. It started in December 2018. It started by protests outside Khartoum in a very small city called Damazin, and soon after started happening across the country. And then we have a body called the SPA, the Sudanese Professional Association, led the entire revolution. But the main actors of the revolution were mainly the civil society, not the political party. We had a coalition of different political parties and different armed groups They were like working in the back scene, but the actual on-the-ground work was done by revolutionaries themselves. So it's a civil society in its biggest, broader sense. Demand-based groups, parallel unions, professional groups, resistance committees. And this is the body, the resistance committees, the formation of the resistance committees from day one until today is what protecting our transition and what is continuing the revolution part 2. So what we did is, in the revolution part 1, it had 2 phases. The first phase was us taking to the streets, us organizing, strikes, professional strikes, boycotting the government, and boycotting all the entities supporting the government. And at the same time, we organized ourselves on the ground as resistance committees on wants and demands, and that shaped our vision on how we want to see the country transiting into democracy. And that ended by a power-sharing deal in June 2019. In round 2, in the revolution round 2, we have evolved a lot. If I look into how we started in 2018 from a few resistance committees around the country to how many resistance committees now, we can't even count them, there are more than 300. And all of these resistance committees now are filling the political vacuum. There is a huge political vacuum. Most of the political parties could not come up with one narrative or vision to aspire to the Sudanese people demands and wants. So these resistance committees now are filling the gap by working on political charters. There are 2 charters released, basically putting a roadmap to economic reforms, economic vision, political vision, and how we want to appoint a government to implement those visions. So we have evolved, our civil society grassroots movements have evolved a lot in the past 3 years into basically filling the political vacuum now in the scene.
Amazing. What I wanted to add as a comment and a question, what we see in Burma and Sudan, which impresses me, and that may be the prelude of what I'm going to ask Jamila next, is how you fight the vertical power with horizontal power. How Sudanese struggle was organized horizontally all the way to the neighborhood committees. So once they cut internet, people spread it by the word of mouth. How Burmese junta was caught off guard because they thought if they arrest everybody from NLD, which was the party ruling the country and ruling the government, and they start from the head all the way to the local organizations, they will somehow decapitate the resistance. But then boom, horizontally all the way around the place, the resistance was playing on. And it's a kind of surprise for the military, which is highly hierarchical organization, to go and kill all the generals. And still soldiers are fighting. They don't understand this thing. This is not what they teach them in a military school. So very impressive in both cases. These movements were capable to develop a horizontal organization outside of existing party political union structures. And actually this organization became the glue of resistance. And then people start flocking in. So Jamila, we mentioned at least 5 things you are an expert on. We mentioned taking the legitimacy, we mentioned ungovernability, we mentioned targeting the right institutions, we mentioned non-cooperation, we mentioned parallel institutions. So what we didn't mention, and it really matters, you see soldiers switching sides or throwing the uniforms. You see the phenomenon called security forces defections. Why are these things so important? What's the purpose of these things? What's the dynamics of this thing?
Yeah, I think that the sort of symbolic acts of rejection of coups, calling it a coup. I mean, coups are successful not because people support them, but because people are too confused to act. They're shocked. They're not prepared. They act ineffectively. They use violence sometimes, which is, again, as we know in our field, that it really kind of ensures the reliability of security forces. So the initial sort of symbolic rejection of coups, which we've seen throughout history, like people wearing kind of ribbons to show that the support for the resistance is widespread, that people are not accepting, that they don't find it acceptable. Obviously international bodies can play a role in making clear that coups are not wanted and that the population doesn't support them. That's extremely important. And then for and we also saw, for example, the banging of the pots and pans. That's been really widespread. So the more widespread that we can show that there's a rejection of the coup, I think initially, as quickly as possible, that is extremely important. But obviously, non-cooperation by institutions in society that the coup needs in order to consolidate power is key. You mentioned security forces, the military, police. That's also a very key one. I think nonviolent discipline is important, right? Nonviolent discipline is important, communicating instructions to people about what they can do to do this widespread disobedience, and that could be outright refusal to obey orders by, government officials and bureaucrats and, other people, legislative bodies, judicial bodies, outright refusal, as we know, is highly risky and carries extreme risk of repression, but it's also the kinds of things like disguised disobedience. There's a lot of examples of people slowing down their work to cause deliberate inefficiencies in the system, taking sick days, losing important documents, forgetting to forgetting to pass on information, things like that. I mean, these are kind of instructions or things we can communicate to the population, in the first days of a coup that I think can be really important in really slowing down the system and creating these inefficiencies. I think nonviolent discipline, again, is important because we need to show security forces they're welcome into the movement, that they're not going to face the risk of violent reprisal, and I think overall, especially when faced with, rejection of the coup by citizens in a society, that can do a lot to weaken support, military support for a coup government. But I mean, overall, we know there's a whole diversity of actions that people can take, and there is no formula or recipe. But what we do know is that power has its sources. Coup governments need those institutions, and identifying where, what institutions they need and undermining support of those institutions is really key. And identifying really where are the pockets of power in society that can play a role in organizing resistance, and recognizing that, those pockets of resistance, those pockets of power, they're important in meeting the needs of the community. I mean, these are really, really difficult times. And so it's important to also recognize, that we need to take care of our communities and also use those neighborhood communities and other things, create them, strengthen them in order to carry out resistance.
Some amazing things you mentioned actually happened in real life, and without taking too much time from Wai and Rani, I will just mention some of them. Amazing idea that because it's COVID, teachers can call in sick in Burma, so there is no schools. Everybody has COVID, And then this amazing, super targeted thing that I'm still impressed with Sudan. It's like, as you said, denying legitimacy doesn't only mean denying legitimacy by yelling on the street. It's denying services and skills. And if you take a look at what really freaked out the military at a certain stage in Sudanese revolution, it was a kind of a very interesting white strike made by people in banks that are doing SWIFT. And the problem with these type of skills is that I don't want to do SWIFT and you don't want to do SWIFT. You cannot bring in the soldier to run the SWIFT system because they have no skills. And by the way, it was targeting the banks from which military was getting paid. So it really hurts. Going to what really hurts, we see a lot of examples of not only isolating Burmese junta or Myanmar junta diplomatically, which really matters. I mean, for God's sake, they persuaded ASEAN, which is not known as the most democratic body in the world, as well as Sudanese persuaded the African Union, the beautiful family of the dictators. Yeah, but they didn't recognize the coup. So that's the point. So it really happens. Like, they deny them legitimacy. I mean, I don't like the body, but they did what I like them to do. So how do you select these people, and how you move to this more strategic part where we are looking at the two very interesting campaigns, one hurting the national petrol and electric company as a main source of revenue in Burma, which I'm impressed with. Another one shutting down the brewery, which is owned by one of the generals. Because guess what? If you put together the Burmese junta and Sudanese junta, you're looking at not possibly Elon Musk size of money, but we are somewhere over there. These people are all full of money. So it's not about the military, it's not about the ideology, it's kleptocracy, INC. So how do you do this?
So we've been using all these strategies that we've talked about. So from the beginning, we saw a lot of teachers, nurses, doctors say we're not going to work under the military. So they refused to go back to their work and they shut down the whole system. And more people joined the civil disobedience movement. And now, over a year later, you know, they're very, very courageous because they haven't got any income to support themselves or their family, but they're still continuing this movement. And of course, you know, the military didn't expect thousands of people to come on the street and protest, let alone people boycotting military companies and businesses. You know, all these people say, oh, we are not going to buy military products, cigarettes, beer, you know, we can...
yeah, by the way, the military owns the biggest cigarette factory, the biggest brewery, just to give you an idea.
So, you know, they are doing these strategy, and, you know, it's part of our continuous movement, and strategy is we are trying to cut off the funding for the military because all the gas revenues they get is one of the biggest income sources for the military, and the activists on the ground they lobbied for Total and Chevron to pull out of the country, and it was a big achievement. They did. These companies, big companies, pull out of the country because they don't want to do business with the military. That's an achievement of the people. And of course, you know, cutting off arms, but there are you know, countries that are still selling arms to the Burmese military, and countries like Japan, South Korea, and Turkey decided to impose arms embargo unilaterally. So it shows that it can happen, you know. And of course, deny legitimacy. We don't want to, you know, recognize the military as the head of the state, and that's an ongoing movement. And most importantly, justice and accountability, because there is a cycle of impunity happening for the Burmese military. They have been committing these atrocities for decades, and, you know, they committed genocide against the Rohingya, and they have been getting away with it. So there is a cycle of impunity. So we are encouraging international community to take action on that and to end that. So there is a continued strategy to, you know, achieve a true federal democracy in Burma. But of course, it's a very long process sometimes.
So that leads us to my last question to Rania, and then I kind of will open it to the audience. We see the strategy, we see successful tactics, we see successes, we see people standing for each other, we see solidarity, we see all of these things. And then transition is achieved, and guess what? The generals are, you know, jumping out of the box again. So how do you maintain morale? That's my key question. It's like inside the movement, how do you feel about it? How do you mobilize people again? How they don't say, oh, it can't be done?
It's not only the military, it's actually the military and the regional support that they're getting from a neighboring country. Other authoritarian countries in the region, they're not happy with any democracy happening in Sudan. So they're sabotaging it, but we are sabotaging it not only for the military, we're sabotaging the interest of those countries as well. How do we keep the morale? This actually reminds me of one thing. One of the resistance committees back in February released a statement, and that sums it up. The statement had one phrase says, "It's the fate of our generation to pay the price of ending military coups in Sudan, and we shall not postpone this fight and this battle." And that became the slogan of this phase. And the other resistance committees responded, that was a call for a march. And the other resistance committees across the country started responding on their Facebook pages saying, you're not going to walk this battle alone. So we had a mission. It's a clear one vision that we're going to end military coups in Sudan, because we had in our entire history since independence, we had only 11 years of interrupted democracies and always interrupted by a coup. So we know this is
So you're a pros.
Yes. It was like, you know what? We're ending this. And on the legitimacy page, that was the exact next morning, the same coup morning, the first slogan came out is 3 no's, and we're still sticking to these 3 no's. No partnership, no negotiation, no legitimacy to the military coup. So we have a clear vision. We waited a little bit for the political power to get their act together and come with a political narrative. And when this didn't happen, we stepped in and we filled this gap. How we are keeping the morale? We are keeping our vision clear, and we know we need to end military coups in Sudan.
Okay, so now I would like to ask the audience whether or not they have questions on this. Ending this with well, too many stories here that we heard these days are bleak. The reality is, even with all of their brutality and even with all of their still staying in power, these guys are in trouble in both cases. I mean, neither Buhari or the Burmese junta cannot sustain the thing. The GDP is shrinking, nobody loves them. Like, there will be a positive development in this. And I want to end this part with a message of hope. You guys are doing great work. And keep doing it. You'll win.
Thank you.
And now up to you.
Hi. I'd like to follow up on the notion of horizontal organization fighting the vertical one. As much as I love this idea, and I think it's really powerful, I guess there has to be some level of organization even at the horizontal stage, at least when it comes to propagating to creating a strategy first and then to disseminating the strategy, which requires some level of verticality, I imagine, to one extent or another, and also command of communication tools. All of those things are points on which the vertical power can act. They can identify whoever is the key strategist or the key strategy group and decapitate it, or they can just shut down the internet or, I don't know, overpower you on Facebook or social media. How do you do to overcome this? And the question is both for Rania and Wai.
What was your model and how you survived horizontally and especially without internet?
Well, without internet, the coup happened, we started learning about the coup at 6 a.m. and the internet was shut down already. So we don't wait. When there is no internet, we go to the street to find out what's happening out there. We started coordinating. Luckily, we had the structure of the civil society and resistance committees in place since the revolution, and the connection between these groups were already happening on the ground. So we managed to keep the communication offline. But back to your point on how we started coordinating horizontally and the current charters, political charter that these resistance committees are coming up with, of course, we definitely at some point we need to go vertical and we need a political umbrella to embrace this and take it up. It's a pressure technique because the political act and the political actors on the scene, they're not really getting together, they're not managing to get one vision that the Sudanese people will agree on this vision and this demand, so we are filling this gap, hoping that some of these political parties will be open to take it and add to it and then take it further. At the same time, these are two different realities. There are two things happening in Sudan now. We have, on one side, we have the UNITAS, which is the UN political mission assigned to Sudan, along with the African Union and the IGAD are working on a mediation process between the military, the military and their alliances, and the opposition, the civilian-led opposition. So they are working on a negotiation, and we are coming up, we're not happy with the narrative, we're not happy to go in a power-sharing deal again. This is why we're pressuring and coming up with our own narrative to the Sudanese people's vision. How do we want to rule? How do we want the economic reforms to happen? What is the political vision? So hopefully, I mean, these political parties cannot go without legitimacy. Even the UN and the African Union, whatever they're working on, if it does not aspire to the needs and the demands of the Sudanese people, it's of no value. So this is why we are working from our side, trying to formulate our vision, high level of coordination among all of these resistance committees, high level of democracy in voting, what is important to put first and what is not important now, is going on. So this will be picked, hopefully, by the political elites to discuss it and to take it on board. But the three no's are agreed on: no partnership, no legitimacy, and no negotiation with the military.
Why?
It's similar to us as well. In terms of the horizontal thing, even with the internet shutdown, they were able to, activist group, they were able to communicate with each other in the beginning. And when you see a group of people going out to protest, a lot of people follow them. And then, after about a couple of weeks, activists found out that maybe it would be better to create a coalition of protest groups, coalitions of General Strike Committee, and so they can communicate better. So we have a different committee organizing different protests and different sort of activities on the ground. And of course, at the same time, a lot of all these activists are talking about our vision for the future, what kind of country we want to live in, what kind of equality we want to have. So, and these, we have a legitimate government that was elected in election in November in 2020. So now that government is in exile, but also, of course, we are trying to make sure that all these visions are shared with the government, to make sure that when they come into power, they share with our vision. We are not going to let them get away with the normal democracy. We want the federal, because Burma is a country with many ethnic groups, and we have civil wars for many years. So we need equality, and we need an inclusive sort of system. So we have been building a system that can be that can accommodate all these ethnic nationalities, and we are sharing that with the exiled government. And hopefully, when they come back to Burma to govern, they can follow that. But it's led by the people.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. My name is Timothy, and I escaped from North Korea. We talk about coup for North Korea. It's almost impossible to have this coup d'etat. I mean, you can only imagine it's been happening over 74 years. But my question is on peaceful resistance, such as case in Burma, and after a few weeks in peaceful protests, eventually we saw even Miss Burma was holding AK-47, and fighting against this military and dictatorship. And would you think, such as a military, even or Sudan's case, that military resistance maybe will happen from civil society group as well? And having also mentioned the exile government you have just addressed, would they be able to take that play and role in resisting and fighting against this military dictatorship in a country like Burma?
So we have after many months of protest and many months of peaceful protesters being killed, this exiled government or legitimate government, National Unity Government, NUG, formed a People Defense Force, so PDF. So a lot of young people have joined this movement and go and get army training and taking arms against the Burmese military. And of course, because of the decades of civil wars, an ethnic armed control area is huge in Burma, and now with the combination of the PDF, this area is, really growing, expanding, and the military is losing on the ground in these areas, and the only thing they can win is to drop bombs from airplanes. So the activists, non-violence activists, people are protesting. What they are calling is to stop selling aviation fuel to the Burmese military. Because they said it's okay, we don't need to take a flight from one city to another, and it's only the middle-class, wealthy people do that anyway. We can just travel, but just stop selling aviation fuel to Burmese military, then they can't drop bombs anymore. So there is a kind of a harmony going on within different movements, and of course, people in activists who are still protesting are doing with such risk. They are moving from one safe house to another, but they know they will be arrested, but they're doing it. And they leave a contingency plan. They said, if I get arrested, this is the plan, you have to continue the movement. And because, like I said, we are very determined. This should be our last struggle. This must be there has to be our last struggle. We are not going to let the military win, and we are not going to live under another military dictatorship.
Jamila, I know you have a strong opinion about military flanks of nonviolent movements. What does the history teaches us?
I mean, it's completely understandable that this level of repression would produce armed resistance. That goes without saying. I think what we know from the research is that, violent wings of nonviolent movements are actually a liability. In fact, they weaken the movement. And I think we have many, many cases to support that, that the very thing that you think is going to, increase your power actually creates sort of a malfunction in the nonviolent movement. So I think nonviolent discipline, as we know, is extremely important. I mean, resistance movements need widespread participation. They need participation from different segments in society. And when you kind of increase the reliance on violent means to defend the community, you're really reducing the participation by women, by older folks, by different people, younger folks, and really kind of creating the conditions for a civil war. And we know that's not really to the benefit of anyone. So it's by no means a moral argument. I think it's really a strategic one. I'm really interested in listening to you both about, we say we need a strategy to be effective, but coups are not something you can exactly plan for. But we do know that they are a problem in our world. So, Rania, you said that the revolution created the structures that are making resistance possible and sustainable now. I'm wondering, how can we do that in advance? Even among societies that are sort of taking democracy for granted, because we know there can be degradation in all of our societies. So I'm wondering, is there like a way to create a sort of civil resistance muscle that can be used to even maybe deter coups, right? With the idea that the would-be aggressor is going to face a costly, resistance, maybe even a shameful defeat like we're seeing. And almost like, a military capacity also defends against would-be aggressors. I mean, is there something like that we can do in our societies so that, when the time comes, if it comes, there people are prepared to defend against it?
Yes. The only thing I can think of is also answering his question. I think it's a readiness, it's building the readiness for that moment by educating on the non-violence tactics, creating a space for dialogue or what's important for us as a nation, even if it's not directly political. And I believe every small act of resistance helps. So when the time comes for people to get together, a small act of resistance were built. For example, if I look at Sudan, my dad was resisting this government for 30 years, since 1991. Art movement, civil society. So all of this is small act of resistance, and the civic space that allowed people to speak about the rights, civil rights, created the right moment. So when it was time, that zero moment, that 0 hour for people to get ready, people were ready. And then we were learning on the go how to do it.
Amazing. Our time is leaking, and this lovely screen is beeping red. You don't see it, but I see it. So first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being brave. Keep up the struggle. We'll get rid of these generals. We'll seize their assets. We'll send them to war tribunals. I promise I'll do my best to help. And once again, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.